Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Esoterica. I'm Leah Eichler, and I'm here with Susan Caddo, also Esoterica. And today we have the distinct pleasure of interviewing Howard Lovy. Howard Lovy is a lifelong journalist. He is a developmental editor, which is what we will discuss in depth today. And he wears a few other hats, which we can discuss at a later date. But let's focus on the first two for now. Howard, thank you so much for joining us.
Sure. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it. It's Lovey.
Lovey.
Like love, just think about love.
Oh, I love that.
That's it.
Okay, Howard Lovy. You know what? I apologize. So that's a really lovely.
Thank
Okay.
you.
So Howard, tell us what's that? What does a developmental editor mean? Because I think a lot of people are confused.
Right. Well, it might mean different things to different developmental editors. So I can only speak to what I do as a developmental editor, and to kind of learn more about my process. I guess it's important to know more about my background. I came up as a journalist for about half of my career. And then about 10 years ago, I realized people stopped reading newspapers, and I had to find something else to do. So I became executive editor of a book review magazine called Forward Reviews, and we reviewed independently published books, which was a good kind of transition between the journalism world and the publishing world for me. So through that, I got into contacts with more authors and more publishers and more editors, and the more I discovered about the world of editing, book editing, the more I discovered I could use these journalism skills that I've gathered over most of my career, and use them as an editor, and that is helping authors to tell stories. And to tell stories in a compelling way that readers will want to read. So that's sort of how I go about it. Now, a developmental editor isn't necessarily the person who's going to check all your grammar and spelling, although I can't help it. I do that also. It's just what I do. But we're looking more for big picture. And when I get a new manuscript, a lot of times the best stuff isn't written yet. And I specialize in memoir and nonfiction because of my journalism background. To me, anything you can make up is not as interesting as reality to me. So I approach them with just a lot of questions, and I get to know them. And from there, we kind of go from there. And I guess I can take your questions in terms of specifically what I do as a developmental editor, because there are many phases to it. But mostly, I try to get the story out of them in a compelling way.
Right. Do you work with seasoned writers mainly, or do you work with newbies? What is your
all of the above.
All of the above.
All of the above, yeah. I get a lot of first-time authors who say, well, I don't know if this is a book. Everybody told me I should write a book about this. And my feeling is that everybody has a book in them, and not everybody agrees with me on that. But I think everybody does have at least one book in them. So I help them take what is a series of events in their lives and help them tell a story. I have people on the other end who are experienced authors who have had big publishing contracts, who want me to be their coach to get them to meet deadlines and give me something by such and such a date, and then I tell them, well, this doesn't work or this does work, and let's talk about how we can it's more reader friendly. A lot of times I'm sort of part editor, I'm part coach, I'm part amateur psychologist to get them to really dig deep down and give me their full story.
What do you think is a really useful phase to consult a developmental editor with a memoir, for example? Is it when you start thinking, I think I'd like to write a book? Is it when you have an outline, if people do outlines for memoirs, which is a bit iffy, or once you have a draft of a book?
I've taken them at all phases. I have one client who was in prison for a lot of years, and he had things scrawled on little bits of paper. I've had others who give me a complete book, who've already been through a number of other editors and want a fresh set of eyes on them. So there's no single point. It depends on how confident you are as a writer. In terms of when you want somebody else's eyes on it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, we obviously see a lot of writers who submit stories to us. Susan and I are always reading like new writers and experienced writers. And I think a lot of people really don't know how to approach developmental editor. I mean, I think they're intimidated. There's a lot of, are they going to not like my work? I mean, how, like, if you were talking to one of those writers, how would you tell them to kind of,
Well, what I do first of all is I have a meeting with them.
Right.
I have a talk with them, usually over Zoom, just like this, and I get their voice, and I try to put them at ease that I'm not there to take a red pen and destroy all their dreams. That I'm there to help them tell their story. And so what I do is I have a talk with them, sort of like the way I did as a journalist.
Right.
I approached journalism, and even when I was a business journalist, I did things a little bit differently. I wouldn't stick a notepad or a recorder in my sources' faces and say, "For the record, will you blah blah blah." I get to know them first, and why are they doing what they're doing, and get them to smile a little bit about what they remember. It was what motivated them at the beginning, and it helps me understand what they're all about. And as a developmental editor, it helps me understand why they're excited about writing about this particular event in their life or this particular story they have. And it also helps me get their kind of quirks and obsessions too,
Right.
which is important when writing a memoir. There's the story, and then there's how you tell the story. And everybody has their own little way of speaking, has their own catchphrases that they like to repeat, has their own sort of obsessions, and that to me helps bring helps a story come to life. Not just this happened and then that happened and then the other thing happened, but it's a matter of telling a story that only you can tell in sort of the only unique way that you can tell it.
I had the distinctly unfun experience of helping someone who was self-publishing. It was a friend of a friend, put it that way. Could you look at this memoir? And I was horrified by a lot of the attitude towards. It was a much older person who had made a habit of marrying women almost like mail order brides. So trouble. So I had the experience, of course, of reading it, making a number of copy editing suggestions, but also making a number of suggestions regarding tone, as far as saying, you're kind of going to alienate the people who might otherwise read this if you talk about women in this way. And of course, zero advice taken. What do you do? But then they weren't paying me to do it. I think there might be a difference if someone actually is paying you, because they trust you. What do you do with people that are very attached and see your feedback as an attack or as missing their point?
Yeah. And I think occasionally you have to part ways if that's the case. I've taken on clients who I disagree with politically, say, or who write in a misogynist way that's very offensive,
Right.
or racist, and which really rubs me the wrong way. I try to work with them though, because I think everybody has a story to tell, and if misogyny or racism is part of your story, then that's what we have to work with. Now, what I also say is, this was actually an actual client, and we ended up parting ways. Was people of a certain nationality or ethnic group are going to be offended by this.
Right.
So is there a way that you can advance that point of view without being offensive? Or if you are being offensive, how have you grown throughout the story? You were like this when you were a teenager, but have you grown since then? Or if you haven't, what are the ways that we can get readers to identify with you, even as they frankly abhor your opinions? And it's hard, as Leah might know from watching my Twitter feed, that I'm a very opinionated about certain things,
True.
so, to say the least. But I don't expect everybody to have my opinion. So I take people as they come.
Right.
If you think that a certain way, I take that as a given, and we go from there. And what story can we tell? In the same way that if you say that you were abducted by aliens, I'll say, fine, whatever. That's your story. You'll stick with it. Let's tell that story. So I'm very non-judgmental. The only line I ever draw is extreme racism, extreme misogynism, anti-Semitism. Those are things that I just won't do. And I've said goodbye to. I can think of 2 clients where I've said this just isn't going to work.
So we've talked about some horror stories. Do you have a favorite, a favorite client that you worked with, or a favorite project that you worked with?
Sure. There was a client who came to me. He has ALS, also known as Lou Gehrig's disease, and he got it relatively young. Most people get it later in life. He was in his late 20s and early 30s when he got it, and it was a slow deterioration over time. My initial conversation with him was hard because he already couldn't speak very well. So a lot of our conversation was through email, and it was difficult because I had to be very blunt with him about a lot of things and not be sensitive. And he told me, nothing offends me, so you can be blunt. He gave me permission to be blunt. So he told a story about how he slowly deteriorated, but there wasn't a lot of internal monologue or internal dialogue as to how he felt while this was happening. And I felt that that's what readers really want to know, not this happened and that happened, but how you felt about it. Really, if you're going to do this, let's get readers inside your mind and how it felt to be an athletic, young man, to suddenly not being able to control your own body movements. And in the end, it worked out really well. He thanked me, and his book is selling, pretty well, because I was able to tell him to reach inside his mind and really tell us how it feels to go through this. So that, it's a favorite client in that I felt good afterward,
right,
that this is it for him. This is the story he's going to tell. And he doesn't know how much longer he has in life. So I felt good that we actually told the story he wanted to tell.
Yeah, that's actually very powerful and heartbreaking. But I'm glad at least his book worked out. That's gonna bring him some joy. Okay, let's move on to some of your other hats that you wear. And before we segue, Howard Lovy, you can actually reach him if you want to work with him as developmental editor. His website is howardlovy.com. And of course, you should follow him on Twitter because it's very entertaining.
At least entertaining, even if you don't agree with me.
You don't agree with him; it's very entertaining. So, okay, so let's talk. You write for Publishers Weekly. You do some other production work. You're a writer, and you've developed this expertise in Jewish nonfiction. I believe, is that accurate to say?
Yeah. A lot of it is because my career has kind of gone a couple of different ways. I was a mainstream journalist working at newspapers for years, but alongside that, I also specialized in writing about Jewish issues. Ever since I was in college and I interned for my local Jewish newspaper. Later, I was managing editor for the Jewish Telegraphic Agency, which is kind of like the the AP of the Jewish world. Different Jewish publications subscribe to it, and I covered things like, and this was back in the early 2000s. Things like Palestinian-Israeli peace talks, this search within Judaism for some kind of connection with younger people. And at the time, strangely, it was what's going to happen with anti-Semitism going away.
Right. Right.
So that's always been sort of like this theme throughout my career. I quit that in the early 2000s. Just because I was burned out on it, and the Israeli-Palestinian peace talks went nowhere, and the Intifada started, and there was, I just got tired of the whole thing. So I went away for about 16 years, and I covered science and technology. I went completely the opposite. It's like science and technology and business. It either is or it isn't, and there's no argument. It turns out there's lots of arguments. Yeah. So then, I took this job as executive editor of Forward Reviews in 2015. And then around 2016, something started happening. Donald Trump saw his rise, and there was this rise in anti-Semitism that I just hadn't seen before in my lifetime. So I slowly got back into it. I contacted some of my old contacts at Jewish publications and started writing again about Jewish issues. With me, it's sort of, I've been doing it for so long, all my life, that I can see historic trends just in my own lifetime. I'm, 57 years old, and come from a family of Holocaust survivors and Holocaust victims. So I kind of have this kind of long view of things. And at the same time, I've also been writing my own memoir about sort of my own relationship with anti-Semitism and Judaism, and I've been getting some very good feedback on that. So hopefully that'll come out soon as well.
That's exciting.
That really is.
Yeah,
So tell us. I mean, so there's a new climate. There's actually there's been a change in the climate, like a distinct change in the climate in terms of the rise in anti-Semitism. What does that mean for writing Jewish nonfiction?
Well, one thing I do, and I do this for selfish reasons, is I interview Jewish authors because I like to hear their points of view. It helps me stay in touch with Jewish publishers. So I do it for Publishers Weekly, for JTA, and also lately for my own Substack newsletter. I've been doing some podcasts. So there's a new generation out right now that they say that the generals often plan for the previous war, and so there's a feeling that the organized Jewish community isn't prepared for what's happening right now. They're used to dealing with Nazis on the fringe protesting, or putting out anti-Semitic material that used to be sort of on the periphery of society. Now it's everywhere. It's on social media, as you know. It's coming from the far left and the far right. And depending on your own political point of view, you only see it on the far left or on the far right, and you don't see it in your own backyard. And people like me who have been following this for a long time, I'm left of center, politically myself, but I also see anti-Semitism on the far left. Anyway, there's a feeling among Jewish authors, especially younger ones, that the organized Jewish community isn't set up for this. So I interviewed a couple of young authors. Chen Mazig is one of them, who's an Israeli author who's also kind of a social media influencer, who's left of center himself, but sees things rising, as he speaks on college campuses. He's called a baby murderer and things like that, and there's, I don't know how political you want to get on this show, but there's this whole argument over what's crossing the line between Palestinian activism and anti-Semitism, and we can argue, till we're red in the face on that. But the problem is very real, that if you're Jewish on campus, you're targeted. And so there are a lot of younger Jewish writers and activists who are taking the matters into their own hands and forming their own support groups and writing their own books about this topic.
So, I mean, the question is, because, it's, the messenger, but how to get the message out. Are publishers open to these topics? Are they self-publishing? Like, how is the message getting out?
A lot of time, I don't think the big publishers are really taking them. Not yet. I think that they probably will eventually. But right now it's small boutique publishers. One of them, Hen's book was published by a kind of a boutique publisher called Wicked Sun Books, that does primarily Jewish. It's published by Adam Bellow, who's the great Saul Bellow's son.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Who has his own kind of political agenda sometimes, but he's publishing these books from people who aren't really part of the big conversation yet. I think they will be, and I think eventually the big publishers will discover that there is a story to be told here, but not yet.
Interesting. Yeah. That's interesting, very fascinating, and a little scary.
Yeah, there's lots of scary things happening, but also a lot of things to write about. So
yeah, that's true.
When you are writing your own memoir, or when you're working with a writer, how do you know when you are done? And is a book ever really done, or is it like Saturday Night Live, where they say it doesn't go on because it's ready, it goes on because it's 11:30 on a Saturday night?
Right.
Exactly. Right. That's a very good question. And because I deal with memoir, real life isn't necessarily wrapped up in a bow, and then everything was right at the end, and then I recovered and everything is fine. But it's a matter of telling a story that makes people think. I try to tell people that a memoir is not an autobiography. You're not writing an autobiography unless you're a celebrity or somebody famous or a famous politician. Nobody is interested in what you had for breakfast every single day, but they're interested in a certain aspect of your life, a certain time period. So often what I tell people, if you want to tell people tell readers what happened afterwards, write an epilogue. Today I'm recovered from this and I moved on to other things, but yeah, it's hard to say the end on your own life.
Yeah. But also the end when you're finished. I mean, as writers, I know you want to tweak and rewrite and revise. I mean, it's, and even when it comes to, sending it to an agent or something, sending it to an editor, when, I guess this is a question we all have, when do you know that it's ready?
Yeah, when an editor tells you it's ready. That's much, but often an author will not know.
Right.
So it takes someone like me to say, well, let's wrap it up here.
Okay.
Or this is a good place to end it because A, B, and C,
Right.
I think it's so important to have that external eye for a memoir. You are so close to it. And then the people that inevitably we first ask to look at our work are usually so close to us that they're implicated in the whole thing. They can't be honest.
Oh, sure. Yeah. And it's hard for me to follow my own advice too. It's one thing as an editor, but as a writer myself, I need another editor to tell me, more of this and less of that, and stop.
Yeah, of course. Do you work with another editor for your work?
Right now, no, and that's probably a problem.
Right.
But it's a matter of, like I say, I wear many different hats, and right now nobody's paying me to write. So.
Right.
What are, besides the books that you have worked on, what do you think are some examples of fantastic memoirs that people who are interested in working in that genre should read?
if you want to talk, we talked earlier about Jewish memoirs, and there was a sort of a subgenre a while back, and Netflix has picked up on it, of Orthodox Jews who've rejected the faith and gone secular, and they're fascinating stories. There's a book called and I hope I don't get this wrong. Those Who Go Do Not Return, and it's the story of one man's. How he came to realize that what he was being told isn't necessarily true about the secular world, and how he gave up everything, his family, everything to enter the secular world. And right now, he's a successful writer now because he understands both worlds.
Right.
To me, those are interesting to read because it gives you a peek into something you're not familiar with. There's a change undergoing, that you go through in your mind, and those are the best kinds of books to edit and to read, where you go through some sort of life-changing realization. And sometimes it can be an addiction, sometimes it can be abuse of suffered, or sometimes it can be a fundamentalist, form of religion that you end up rejecting. But people, at least me, it's fascinating how you kind of go from the realization that something is not right with your life to something to let's do something about it and really sacrifice to do it.
Love that.
Yeah, that actually sounds like a great memoir.
Yeah, I just looked it up. It's by Shulim Dean.
Yes.
All Who Go Do Not Return.
Right. Right. Excellent book.
Oh, it sounds like a great book. Well, this has been wonderful. And just to wrap up, Howard Lovy, who is developmental editor, and he is a writer and a memoirist, and we hope to see his memoir shortly on the shelves. And if you'd like to work with Howard, you can go to his website, howardlovy.com. And this has been very instructional and very beneficial. And thank you so much and also follow him on Twitter and Substack, because it's very educational and very entertaining. We will cross post this on Substack so everyone can read it as well.
Wonderful.
Well, thank you, Howard. It was great having you on.
Thank you, Leah and Susan. I appreciate your time.
All right, everyone. See you next week. Bye until then.
Bye.